Hello everyone, Grim here, and as you can probably tell, it's time for another one of my narrations. This one is titled, My Friend and I Went Hiking, and I'm Starting to Think She Never Left Those Woods. Written by a familiar face, JamFranz. So, sit back, relax, and let's begin. My friend Samantha and I were so excited to take a road trip together, to go hiking somewhere further from home. We'd been talking about it since we graduated college a few years back, and finally found the time. Well, she always made time. It was mainly me that had trouble between balancing work and anything else. Looking back on it now, I wish I'd spent more time of this trip focusing on Sam, the scenery, and being present in the moment. I wish I'd been a better friend. Sam was the most excited for our trip. The week before we left, she was texting me about restaurants in the area, stuff to do. She even made a Spotify playlist with both of our favorites so we could listen to 7 hours worth of an electric mix of classic rock, pop, and black metal. She was even marking trailheads we might enjoy on her Google Maps. I felt bad for putting the trip off for so long. We got to catch up, explore, try cool food. We had a great trip until our final hike. We're both in decent shape, and since we had the supplies and plenty of daylight, we decided we were going to take a longer, unpaved trail that went around this beautiful lake. It was the last hike of our trip, and we decided to take a more difficult, less crowded trail. Initially, it was such a wonderful hike. The water was such a surreal shade of blue, and the pine trees and the rolling hills were breathtaking. The air was thinner than we were used to, but so refreshing. As we hiked around one bend, I almost ran into Sam's back. I had been falling behind, focusing on placing my feet in exactly the right locations in soft dirt, so I didn't go sliding 20 feet down to the shore. Sam stood frozen, a deer in front of her, blocking the trail. As I approached with my backpack jingling and breathing heavily, the deer stood for a moment more, tilting its head sideways at me before darting back into the pine. She looked back at me, her face tight. "Did you see that?" The deer. "Yeah, it was pretty magical." She gave a little laugh and started up again so we could both move onto the section of the trail that had sturdier footing. "No, I mean something was wrong with that deer. It was way too comfortable around me, and I don't know if you could see or hear it, but it was drooling and making weird sounds." We continued on in silence after that, as we focused on our footing and the scenery, stopping every so often to take pictures. One time, when we were stopped, we heard rustling to our right, higher up in the hill. I got the bear spray out and held onto it. It seemed to be walking parallel to us, roughly matching our pace. It sounded big too. Eventually, the hiking trail rose to meet the other high part of the hill, and I couldn't help but sigh in relief. I'd been so worried I'd roll my ankle and tumble down the mountain, so it was good to have more room so I wasn't walking right on the edge. Back in college, I'd sprained my ankle badly, but couldn't afford a doctor It healed a bit oddly, and since then my left ankle has been iffy. After a while, I needed to sit for a moment, walking uphill for an hour. In addition to the 6,500-foot elevation, I was struggling. Maybe I'm also a bit more out of shape than I had been willing to admit to. Sam sat with me for a moment, but then saw some wild flowers about 10 feet in the woods and left to go take a quick picture. With her gone, I felt a sudden chill. Something was watching me. "Sam," I called out nervously as the rustling grew louder, and I gripped my container of beer spray tightly. It stepped out of the woods, and it was just a deer. Or more specifically, it was the deer, the same one that Sam had encountered. Now that she had pointed it out, I could see what she was saying. The deer had no issue approaching me. It was scrawny, walking slowly, but like it had too much to drink. And it was definitely drooling. I jumped up and waved my arms at it. "Go away!" I knew it was sick, and the poor thing was confused and probably suffering, but it creeped the hell out of me. It cocked its head and seemed to be studying me, looking me up and down. It approached me and made some sort of gasping sound. It was opening and closing its mouth in a way which deeply unsettled me for some reason. "Sam!" She came running towards me from the woods, and when I turned back, it had gone. "Are you okay? What happened?" "The creepy deer, it was back. I know it sounds silly, but I think it's been following us." I told her how it had been behaving. "Do you think it's rabid?" "Poor baby," she said sympathetically. "Possibly. Or, I wonder if it has CWD. Either way, we probably should let the park rangers know about it just in case." We had decided to stick together, but after a few miles she ended up ahead of me again. She tends to inch forward to get pictures, whereas I tend to walk past sites, then have regrets and double back to take pictures. I had walked back a bit and was sitting down, angling my phone weirdly, trying to fit the scene in front of me into frame, when I heard Sam's voice, but I couldn't make out what she's saying. "Hey, I'll be right there," I said, my voice slightly raised, assuming she was talking about me. Then she screamed, "Sam?" I stood up and tried to walk as quickly and carefully as possible. Her screaming changed from fear to agony, and it sounded like she was sobbing. I wasn't sure what happened, but I could tell she was scared and likely hurt. I suddenly realized I was holding our only canister of beer spray. Against my better judgment, I started running as fast as I could, and for a while I was making good time. But then my left foot landed on a patch of soft dirt at the edge of the trail. My ankle rolled, and I was falling. I don't remember hitting the ground, but I remember opening my eyes, flat on my back about 15 feet between where I had been standing. It was dark outside. We'd started hiking at least 6 or 7 hours before sunset. I tried to stand, but it was a struggle. I was confused, disoriented. Trying to get up was taking all of my energy and focus. I had a deep feeling of dread I couldn't explain, As I started slowly moving upward on my hands and knees, I tried to recall what had happened leading to my fall. Sam sounded hurt. She was screaming. I had run after her, and then I fell. Shit, Sam. I called her name, my voice hoarse, but no response. My phone was surprisingly only minorly damaged, but I had no reception. Luckily, since it had been buckled to me, I still had a backpack. I dug through it. We had first aid kits, but I figured I could patch myself up later. I didn't want to stay down here any longer than I had to. I found my knife and my headlamp. After about 20 minutes, I had slowly and painfully ascended back towards where I had fallen from. My hands were raw, and I could feel my right knee bleeding through my pants. I was trying to go slowly since I trusted my feet even less now, and dizziness was starting to creep in, but panic and fear drove me forward. Once I made it back to the trail, I had to sit for a moment. I heard rustling behind me and felt a sudden pang of fear. Something or someone had injured Sam, and here I was, sitting alone, injured with my back to the woods, in the dark. I tried calling her name in case it was her that I heard. No response. I stood up and started limping as quickly as possible towards the direction that I had last heard her scream. Luckily, the ground had evened out because I could feel myself weaving unsteadily. I knew something terrible may have happened to her, but I kept trying to keep that thought out of my mind. As my calls to her remained unanswered, and it became harder and harder to imagine a scenario in which she was okay, I felt my throat tighten and tears rolled down my cheeks. I kept looking for her. I knew she wouldn't just leave me here. I think a part of me knew then that she was gone. She would have been searching for me if she was okay, and even if she left to go get help, I think they would have found me by now. Somehow, eventually, I navigated my way to where I thought she had been last. I was hoping maybe if she was injured, she was okay and just out of it, confused like I was. My foot caught in the mud and I fell. Lights flashed behind my eyelids and I felt overcome with nausea. The light from my headlamp had greatly dimmed as it was now coated with mud and grime. I heard movement behind me, and as the smell hit me, I realized the mud was a mixture of dirt and blood. I could taste it, mixed with the gritty texture, leaves covered with what was likely blood stuck to my face, and I felt something soft and wet under my shoulder. The rustling behind me became discernible as footsteps. I felt around for my knife, my bear spray, but instead I felt something hard, sticky. I was certain I had just found out what had happened to Sam, and had a good guess as to what was about to happen to me next. I felt no urge to get up as the footsteps got closer. I knew I couldn't outrun it. I closed my eyes, trying to focus on something, anything else, not knowing if I wanted to see what was coming for me. The footsteps stopped, and I could hear labored breathing coming from above me. I waited, and then, as no blows came, I opened my eyes. It was Sam. She stood over me, breathing heavily from her mouth. She was covered in blood. Her Her shirt and pants were torn, but she was alive. I let out a relieved sob and then could no longer hold back the tears. "Oh my God," I whispered as I slowly moved to sitting and then standing. "I thought I had lost you." I pulled her close to me into a hug. She stood motionless, her arms at her side. She stuck to me where her shirt was still a bit wet. Dry blood covered the neck of her shirt and her midsection. Her hands, and unsettlingly, her mouth, were also smeared with blood. I could still hear her breathing heavily, close to my ear. "What happened?" I asked as I released her. She stared at me but didn't respond. I figured she was a bit traumatized. Frankly, I wasn't sure how she was up and standing at all after whatever had happened. She was a bit wobbly, but otherwise seemed to be able to walk, and as we walked towards the car, she fell behind me, which made me nervous as I didn't want to let her out of my sight. She kept stopping, staring over her shoulder while I tried to coax her forward. Eventually, after what felt like forever, we made it back. My ankle was killing me, but I had tried to move as fast as possible. Although the woods were eerily silent, I wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. When I got in the car, I was debating if we should drive ourselves to hospital or call 911. I had this feeling of terror that I couldn't shake. I pictured us making all the way here to the car and then something breaking the window and attacking us. I decided we had to leave now. "Do you have your keys? Do you think you can drive?" I asked. She had an old Jeep pickup and was very sensitive about other people driving her baby. Plus, I wasn't sure if I could drive with my ankle the way it was. She said nothing, cocked her head at me. "I know, we look like we've been mauled by a bear." I caught myself and winced, feeling suddenly insensitive. She clearly had been attacked by something or someone. When she said nothing, displayed no emotional reaction, I cautiously continued. "But I have a bad feeling. I think we need to leave, like right now. I'd rather call for help when we're back on the main road, or just driving straight to the hospital." She remained motionless, staring back into the woods, and I wondered if she lost her keys in whatever struggle she had. Luckily, I had her spare with me. I unlocked the door, and she continued to stand outside. I realized I would need to punish my ankle a little bit more, because she was far too out of it to drive. I slid in, but she remained motionless. "Sam, get in, please. Something is out there still. Please." She was licking her lips, staring back at me again. In the darkness, her blue eyes looked almost black. I limped back out of the seat and opened the door for her, and had to guide her in. I buckled her in after she made no move whatsoever to do so for herself. As we drove, the headlights of passing cars illuminated the interior. I kept checking on her out of the corner of my eye. She was breathing in and out of her mouth and staring at me. I noticed now, in better light, that she was drooling. "Hey, how are you doing?" No response, but she began opening and closing her mouth and making a weird gasping sound as she had been breathing in and out. Her breath reeked and her teeth tinged pink. I didn't have much medical knowledge but I was worried she had punctured a lung due to the strange sounds she was making. Holding tight, we were about 20 minutes away from the hospital. Despite my ankle, I drove as fast as I could. We made it in 10. As we pulled up, I helped guide her out of the car and walked behind her, steadying her. I noticed something. Her shirt was inside out. It hadn't been this morning. Likely because of how we looked, they found rooms for us immediately in the ER. I had a bad sprain and a concussion and would need a few stitches, but it felt so good just to be out of those woods. I asked the nurse who came in to check on me about how Sam was doing. I mentioned to him that I'm not sure if she was attacked by an animal or a person. I mentioned that what I had noticed about her shirt and that we may have encountered a sick animal, in case any of that helped. When he returned, he was clearly distressed. Sam was gone. She hadn't appeared to be outwardly injured, strangely, but they had wanted to assess her for internal trauma. However, the first moment they had left her alone, she had just walked out, judging by the bloody footprints. It's been weeks, and I haven't seen Sam since. Her mum hasn't either. She has been working with the police out here. They think Sam has a head wound and is just confused and will turn up in town eventually. But a few days ago, I heard on the news that a partial skeleton was found in the trail we were on. Likely the victim of an animal attack, they said. And due to the condition of the body, they were asking for any leads so they could use dental records to help identify the victim. This may sound crazy, but I think it's her they found. I don't know how to explain it, but I don't think Sam ever left the woods that night. It's my fault. And I don't know what that thing is that I drove into town. It's my fault. And I don't know what that thing was that I drove into town. If you live in South Colorado, please be safe. And I'm sorry. Wow, that was another great story. It's good to see that there are a lot of really good authors on this subreddit. Well, hey, a lot of you on here are my friends, thankfully, and I have to thank you all for jumping on and subbing even if you don't watch my videos. I have reached 100 subscribers. That does fluctuate daily, but hey, it's good to see a little community is starting to grow. If you do like what I'm doing and you want to hear more of these stories, just subscribe, like, jump along. I'll probably do something for the 100 subscribers, maybe a special video, maybe another story that I've written. But again, and as always, have a wonderful night or day. And this is Grim, signing off.